In December of 1887, the winter reached Black Hollow before anyone was ready for it. The snow had begun falling 3 weeks earlier, but the cold was what frightened people. It came down from the northern mountains each night, slipping between the wooden walls of cabins and settling beneath their floors. By midnight, water left beside a stove could develop a skin of ice. Eliza Mercer knew that cold better than anyone. She was 32 years old, a widow, and the mother of 2 boys. Her husband, Thomas, had died that spring beneath a wagon he had been repairing near the river road. Since then, Eliza had kept their small cabin running with the help of 14-year-old Samuel and 7-year-old Noah. Samuel had taken over the work his father once did. He chopped wood before sunrise, carried water from the creek, and checked the chickens before darkness. Noah was too young for most chores, but he followed his brother everywhere. That night, Noah was coughing again. Eliza pulled another blanket over him and looked toward the iron stove. The fire was burning well. That was the problem. They were burning wood faster than they ever had, yet the cabin remained cold. Samuel entered carrying another armful of split logs. He placed them beside the stove and looked at the nearly empty woodpile outside. "Mother," he said quietly, "there won't be enough." Eliza did not answer immediately. She already knew. If they continued burning wood at that rate, the pile would disappear before January ended. The next morning, she tried everything she knew. She packed dry grass beneath the floorboards. She pushed old cloth into the cracks along the walls. She nailed a piece of canvas over the northern side of the cabin and piled loose earth against the foundation. For one night, the cabin felt warmer. Then the wind returned. By morning, the canvas had torn loose, the grass beneath the floor was damp, and Noah's blanket was cold again. Eliza began watching the cabin instead of simply fighting it. She noticed something strange near Noah's bed. A small candle placed on the floor would not burn straight. Its flame leaned toward the eastern wall. She moved it. The flame leaned again. Eliza lifted one floorboard and lowered the candle into the darkness beneath the cabin. The flame bent sharply. Air was moving underneath them. She crawled outside with a lantern and examined the foundation. The cabin stood on uneven stones, leaving narrow openings beneath the floor. The northern wind was entering those gaps and racing beneath the house. The stove was heating the air above. The wind was stealing that warmth from below. Eliza remembered something Thomas had once told her while digging a root cellar. "Air changes quickly," he had said. "Ground doesn't." She looked at the frozen earth beside the cabin. An idea began forming. Instead of trying to make the cabin warmer from above, perhaps she could give her family a place below the wind. That evening, after Samuel and Noah had fallen asleep, Eliza took Thomas's old measuring line from the wall. She placed it across the eastern half of the cabin floor. Then she marked the boards with charcoal. Samuel woke and stared at her. "What are you doing?" Eliza looked at the marks. "Building somewhere the wind can't reach." She lifted the first floorboard. Beneath it was darkness, frozen earth, and the beginning of a dangerous idea. Eliza did not begin with a large hole. She knew one mistake could bring the cabin down. Using Thomas's measuring line, she marked a narrow rectangle beneath the eastern half of the floor. She kept it well away from the stones supporting the stove and the main walls. The chamber would be low, barely high enough for a person to sit comfortably. Samuel watched as she made the final mark. "How deep?" "Deep enough to get beneath the wind," Eliza answered. The first shovel broke through frozen soil with a sound like iron striking stone. Samuel carried each sack of earth outside while Eliza continued digging. The upper layer was hard and dry, but several feet down, the soil became darker and easier to shape. Noah sat beside the opening with a lantern, counting the sacks. By the third day, the hole was deep enough for Eliza to stand inside. But the work was changing the cabin. Cold air poured through the opening whenever the wind rose, and Eliza had to cover the hatch with a heavy blanket each evening. She also began using old fence timbers as temporary braces. Every piece of wood had a purpose. Nothing could be wasted. On the fifth morning, Eliza made her first serious mistake. She widened the northern wall before placing the next brace. The soil moved. A dry section suddenly broke loose and crashed beside her. The lantern disappeared beneath the dirt. Eliza felt the earth clamp around her left leg. "Mother!" Samuel rushed toward the opening. "Stay there," she shouted. He froze. "Get the rope." Samuel grabbed the rope hanging beside the cabin and lowered one end through the opening. Eliza worked with both hands, pulling loose dirt away from her leg. The pressure made every movement painful. For nearly 20 minutes, she fought her way free. When Samuel finally pulled her from the excavation, she could barely stand. But she did not return to the hole. Instead, she entered the cabin and examined the floorboards above the excavation. A thin crack had appeared. Eliza stared at it for a long moment. The mountain had given her a warning. She filled part of the excavation back in. Then she placed a new brace before removing another shovel of earth. From that day forward, every section was supported before the next one was opened. Samuel never forgot the collapse. Neither did Eliza. A few days later, an old carpenter named Jacob Hale came to inspect the work. He had repaired foundations throughout Black Hollow and understood the mountain better than most men. He climbed into the chamber without speaking. He studied the walls. Then the braces. Then the narrow opening planned for the entrance. "You've kept clear of the foundation," he said. Eliza nodded. "That may save the cabin." He pointed toward the northern wall. "But this stone will collect moisture." Then he examined the small ventilation pipe she had installed. "Fresh air must enter low," he warned, "and damp air must leave high. But if the wind catches that pipe, you'll bring the cold straight inside." Eliza looked at the unfinished chamber. "What should I do?" Jacob shook his head. "Don't ask what I would do. Watch what the room does." That night, Eliza finished the first sleeping platform. She placed a candle near the floor. The flame leaned gently toward the intake. Another candle near the ceiling leaned toward the exhaust. For the first time, the underground room was breathing. Eliza looked at Samuel. "Tomorrow," she said, "we test it with all three of us." But before dawn, she noticed something shining on the northern wall. Water. The room was warmer. And now it had a new problem. Eliza touched the wet stone with 2 fingers. The wall was sweating. She immediately moved the blankets away from it. Moisture in a cold room could be as dangerous as the cold itself. If the bedding became damp, Noah would lose heat faster, and mold could spread through the chamber. Samuel watched her pull apart the northern wall. "Are we starting over?" "Not everything," Eliza said. "Only what we got wrong." She removed several stones and widened the space behind them. Then she packed the gap with dry grass, strips of wool, and pieces of cottonwood bark. She also raised the upper exhaust slightly so damp air could escape more easily. For 3 nights, she checked the wall. The wet patch became smaller. On the 4th morning, the stone was dry. Eliza allowed herself one quiet smile. But winter was not finished. A hard western wind arrived 2 days later. Samuel was checking the intake pipe when he noticed the candle flame dancing wildly. Cold air was rushing through the pipe. Eliza crawled outside. The pipe faced southeast, but the cabin wall was bending the western wind around the corner and pushing it directly toward the opening. She gathered flat stones and willow branches and built a small windbreak around the intake. Then she added a short elbow to the pipe, forcing incoming air to change direction before entering the room. They tested it again. The candle steadied. "Write it down," Eliza told Samuel. He opened the notebook. What? Everything. Wind direction. Temperature. Firewood. From then on, Samuel measured the room every morning. The underground chamber stayed between 44 and 48 degrees while the cabin floor above remained painfully cold. More importantly, they burned much less wood. Noah coughed less. But Eliza refused to trust 3 quiet nights. She knew winter could change without warning. On January 18, it did. Snow began falling before sunrise. By afternoon, the wind was driving it sideways across Black Hollow. By nightfall, trails disappeared beneath drifts. The temperature dropped far below zero. One cabin lost its chimney. Another family burned furniture because their firewood was buried. Smoke rolled backward into several homes. Eliza kept her family below. Then Samuel noticed the warning candle. It is shorter. Eliza looked toward the exhaust. Snow had buried the vent. She tied a rope around her waist. Hold this. Samuel wrapped both hands around the rope as she stepped into the storm. The snow reached her knees. She crawled toward the vent, found the buried opening, and drove the handle of her shovel through the packed snow. The moment the passage opened, the rope went slack. Eliza returned half frozen. Below, the candle flame rose steadily again. The room remained warm. Then came 3 weak knocks at the cabin door. Eliza climbed upstairs and opened it. Jacob Hale stood outside, carrying a little girl wrapped in a torn blanket. Her name was Clara. Her family cabin had filled with smoke, and the child was barely conscious. Please, Jacob said. Is there room? Eliza looked toward the hatch. The chamber had been built for 3. She looked at Noah. Then Samuel. Finally, she nodded. There is room for one more. They brought Clara below. Samuel moved his bedding aside. Noah silently gave the little girl his warmest blanket. Within an hour, Clara stopped shaking. Outside, the blizzard continued. Inside, the candle burned straight. For the first time, Eliza understood what she had actually built. Not a warmer house. A place where winter could no longer decide who survived.